Lewis Hamilton has spent most of the 2026 Formula One season chasing something he could feel, but not always explain. Every straight brought the same sensation: full throttle, a strong exit, and then a sudden pull backward as a rival car simply sailed past. It happened at Austria. It happened at Japan. It happened often enough that Hamilton's own teammate, Charles Leclerc, described the frustration bluntly over team radio during qualifying for the Japanese Grand Prix, saying, "I honestly cannot stand this qualifying." Leclerc had just watched Mercedes and McLaren cars blast away from him the moment they hit the throttle on the straights, despite outbraking and outcornering them everywhere else on the lap. That contradiction, a car brilliant through corners and helpless in a straight line, became the defining storyline of Ferrari's season, and it was Hamilton who carried the weight of it into the second half of the championship. The numbers behind the frustration were not vague. At the Austrian Grand Prix, Ferrari's straight-line deficit to Mercedes reportedly exceeded 20 km per hour. That gap was large enough to nearly cause a collision. Mercedes championship leader, Kimi Antonelli, was lining up an overtake on Leclerc's Ferrari when the Italian driver found himself closing the gap far faster than expected, eating up several car lengths in an instant as the SF26 ahead of him suddenly lost pace. Antonelli said afterward, "They were deploying so weirdly," describing the moment in the cool-down room following the race. It was not a complaint from a rival trying to needle Ferrari. It was a driver noticing, from inside his own cockpit, that something about Ferrari's power delivery was behaving unpredictably enough to nearly put two cars into each other. That unpredictability traces back to how the 2026 power unit regulations work. Under the new rules, roughly 47% of a Formula One car's total power now comes from the electrical side of the hybrid system, the MGUK, drawing from a battery that was tripled in electrical output compared to the previous generation of engines, but has to serve a much heavier workload across the lap. The result is a car that can be sensational in one section of track and starved of energy in another, depending on exactly when and how the driver spins what's stored in the battery. There is no override switch for this. No clever engine map creates energy from nothing. Teams can only choose where they run out. And for much of 2026, Ferrari kept running out exactly where it hurt Hamilton and Leclerc the most, on the long straights, right as a rival prepared to pounce. The precision required to manage that battery has already reshaped how rival teams approach a lap. At recent events, Mercedes drivers were found to be deliberately lifting off the throttle earlier than expected before certain corners, not out of caution, but as a calculated method of preserving energy, so more could be deployed earlier on the following straight. The trick relies on lifting before the battery hits 0%, since an empty battery causes the MGUK to cut off instantly and can breach the sport's ramp-down rules. Antonelli missed out on sprint pole to Hamilton by just 0.011 seconds at one event where this method was in play, a margin so small that other teams are now expected to copy the approach at future rounds. The episode underlines just how thin the margins around energy management have become under the 2026 rules, and how much a car's raw drag level, the very thing Ferrari is now addressing at Spa, interacts with those margins on every single lap. Inside the team, this problem earned an unofficial nickname, and it surfaced publicly in a moment far removed from a garage debrief. At a fan event ahead of the Austrian Grand Prix, Hamilton told the crowd, "I'd love to skydive into the track one day. That's what I would like to do." Leclerc, sitting beside him, asked whether Ferrari would actually allow that. Hamilton said yes. Leclerc's response drew laughter from the fans. "They don't with me." He added, "They don't trust me maybe with a parachute." It was a throwaway joke about a hobby, but the word landed on something real. Within weeks, the press had adopted parachute as shorthand for the very problem Leclerc had been fuming about on team radio. The drag that deployed itself behind the car exactly when Ferrari needed none of it. Some of that drag had a precise engineering explanation, and it centered on a piece of technology Ferrari itself had pioneered. During pre-season testing in Bahrain, Ferrari introduced what became known as flick-tail mode, or FTM, a blown exhaust flap that directs hot exhaust gases toward the lower section of the rear wing. The system increases rear downforce and significantly improves stability through medium and high-speed corners. It worked well enough that rival teams began developing their own versions of the concept, and the FIA has already confirmed it will ban this type of exhaust winglet from the 2027 regulations specifically to simplify rear-end aerodynamics across the grid. That ruling means Ferrari has exactly one season to extract full value from an innovation before it becomes illegal, a clock that is already running out. The irony is that the very system making the SF26 formidable in the corners was working against it everywhere else. Blanking off the lower part of the exhaust exit costs Ferrari an estimated 7 horsepower, a figure that matters little in a technical corner but becomes very detrimental. According to reporting from the Italian edition of Motorsport.com, on a circuit dominated by long straights. The car that could outcorner almost anyone was quietly punishing itself the moment the road went straight. The exact scenario Antonelli had noticed, and the exact scenario Leclerc had raged about after Suzuka. But the flap was never the deepest layer of the problem. Underneath it sat the far more stubborn issue of energy deployment itself. Ferrari's battery, like every other team's under the new regulations, has a fixed amount of stored electrical power to spend across a lap. Spend it early, and a driver has nothing left in reserve exactly when a rival lines up a move deep into a straight. That is what happened to Leclerc in Austria, and it is a structural characteristic of the 2026 power unit, not a setup mistake that can be dialed out in an afternoon. No clever engine map creates energy from nothing. Teams only choose where they run dry. And for most of the season, Ferrari had been running dry in precisely the wrong places. Hamilton has spoken publicly about what changed for him personally as this season progressed, and it goes beyond any single component. Ahead of his home race at Silverstone, he pointed to a shift in how Ferrari listens to its drivers, saying, "One being a car that I really have helped develop. There's items on the car, for example, front suspension, that I'd asked for last year and had it made for the sim and tested it on that. This year, finally got the brakes that I wanted, which was a big push." He added that engineer changes within his personal side of the garage had improved how his team connects with the wider operation. It is a detail worth holding onto heading into Spa. The aerodynamic gamble being taken this weekend is not an isolated engineering decision handed down from above, but part of a broader pattern of Ferrari actually acting on driver feedback in 2026, after Hamilton had previously questioned aloud where the team's innovation had gone. Then came Silverstone, and the story complicated itself. Ferrari arrived at Hamilton's home race carrying a genuine upgrade rather than just a promise. According to reporting from motorsport.com, changes to the brake duct, barge board, and diffuser made the SF26 meaningfully more streamlined, effectively removing what had already been informally dubbed the car's parachute, even before the Spa plan existed. The early signs were startling. Hamilton was fastest through the speed trap in sprint qualifying, a result Italian media described as looking like an anomaly based on the previous 8 rounds of the season, and he converted that pace into sprint pole position. Ferrari's own simulations had predicted the team would be 6 to 7 tenths off Mercedes' pace on a power-hungry layout like Silverstone. In the end, the gap over a single lap was less than 2 tenths. The main race, though, told a more complicated story than a simple triumph. Hamilton's start went wrong, and an understeer-heavy setup pulled him out of contention for the win during the opening stint. It was Leclerc who fought his way to victory, holding off Antonelli in a battle that the Mercedes driver likely would have won outright had he not suffered a broken wheel shield along the way. Hamilton finished third. The result meant Ferrari's straight-line fix was real. The top speed numbers proved it, with Hamilton clocking the fastest speed trap figure of the entire Grand Prix at 352 km per hour. But it also meant the drama of Hamilton personally converting that pace into a win at his home race did not arrive. Silverstone was proof of concept. It was not proof of resolution. That distinction matters heading into the Belgian Grand Prix, because Ferrari is preparing to go further still. According to the Italian edition of motorsport.com, Ferrari technical director Loic Serra has approved a plan to remove the team's flick-tail mode exhaust flap entirely for the first time all season. Teams almost never voluntarily strip away a genuine competitive advantage. Doing so is effectively an admission that the advantage has become a liability on this specific weekend. The decision was not made on a hunch. Ferrari's preparations reportedly began weeks in advance, during the opening practice session of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend, when Formula 2 driver Dino Beganovic replaced Leclerc as part of the team's mandatory rookie program and ran the car without the FTM system fitted, specifically to gather clean low-drag data. That session reportedly convinced Serra that abandoning the flap could be the most effective solution available for Spa-Francorchamps. The choice of circuit is not incidental. Spa-Francorchamps produces the longest lap on the calendar and is dominated by full-throttle sections, including the run out of La Source through Eau Rouge and Rydillon onto the Kemmel Straight, followed by another sustained blast from Stavelot to the bus stop chicane. Reflecting how much straight-line running the circuit rewards, the FIA has published a record 5 separate low-drag activation zones for Spa in 2026, the highest number of any circuit this season, replacing the old DRS system entirely under the new Active Aero regulations. Any extra drag carried through those sections, according to reporting from F1 Oversteer, would just serve to hold Hamilton and Leclerc back in the SF26. Formula One teams routinely strip downforce for Spa in ordinary seasons. Ferrari's decision to go further and remove a signature aerodynamic innovation makes this one of the more aggressive setup calls the team has made all year. The scale of the gamble grows further when paired with a second reported change. Ferrari is also expected to introduce a more aggressive version of its rear wing package, referred to in Italian media as the Macarena EVO, designed specifically for low downforce circuits and already granted final approval in Maranello. Combined, the reported package could be worth as much as 11 kilometers per hour of additional top speed on Spa's longest straights, while the flap removal alone is expected to recover the roughly 7 horsepower it currently costs the car. It represents, by any measure, one of the most significant single-weekend technical shifts Ferrari has made in the 2026 season. Notably, this direction runs opposite to what Red Bull is reportedly planning for the same weekend, with the two teams' engineering departments approaching Spa's demands from entirely different philosophies, a contrast that will only sharpen how clearly Sunday's result can be read. None of this comes without cost. Spa is not simply a straight-line circuit. Its middle sector contains one of the fastest and most committed corner sequences anywhere on the calendar, and the FIA has deliberately chosen not to place any low-drag activation zone through Pahon, one of the quickest and most demanding corners in Formula One, because tackling it without strong downforce would introduce what officials consider an unacceptable level of risk. Removing the blown exhaust flap sacrifices exactly the kind of rear-end stability that corner rewards. Ferrari is betting that the gains on the straights will outweigh what is lost through the technical sequences, a trade the team will not fully understand until the cars are actually on track, because, as reporting from F1 Natics put it, any gain in straight-line speed is almost certainly accompanied by compromises elsewhere. It is also worth being precise about what this weekend's changes will and will not solve. Removing the flap addresses drag. It does nothing to change how quickly Ferrari's battery depletes on a given straight, which means the deployment fade that troubled both drivers in Austria and unsettled Antonelli enough to nearly clip Leclerc's car could still resurface at Spa, regardless of how clean the car's aerodynamics are. The deeper fix for that issue lies in a further evolution of Ferrari's power unit, an upgrade still being developed in Maranello, distinct from the aerodynamic package arriving this weekend. Spa, in other words, is not the race where Ferrari's underlying problem gets solved. It is the race where the team finds out whether it can compete at a power-sensitive circuit without having solved it yet. The urgency behind all of this is not abstract. It is written directly into the championship table. After the British Grand Prix, Hamilton sits third in the drivers' standings, 32 points behind championship leader Antonelli, with George Russell sitting between them, just 25 points off the top. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes leads Ferrari by 78 points, having already claimed 7 race wins in 2026. Even Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff, no longer Hamilton's boss, but still closely familiar with how he operates, has acknowledged the danger of underestimating him in a title fight. I'd rather not fight with him for a title, because I know what he's capable of. If he smells blood, he goes, Wolff said recently. I've seen it many years where suddenly the Lewis Hamilton train started to go, and then it's very difficult to stop it. Hamilton has closed distance recently, a run of 5 races that produced 4 podiums, including his maiden Ferrari victory in Barcelona, but the leader of the championship is not the driver most expected at this stage of the season. Antonelli, a teenager in only his first full campaign, has built the bulk of his advantage on exactly the kind of high-speed, power-sensitive circuits that Spa represents. Waste this weekend, and the math for closing that gap gets considerably harder with the season's remaining races dwindling. Even Ferrari's own recent history at Spa argues against overconfidence. The team's last win in Belgium came in 2019, when Leclerc claimed his maiden Grand Prix victory. In each of the 4 editions since, Ferrari's best result has been 3rd place. Hamilton, by contrast, arrives as one of the most successful drivers this circuit has ever seen, with 5 Belgian Grand Prix victories, 1 short of Michael Schumacher's all-time record of 6, his most recent coming in 2024, during his final season with Mercedes. That personal history at Spa sits in direct tension with the data suggesting the SF20 SIXS power unit deficit tends to hurt Ferrari most at exactly this type of track. One independent Formula One metric published earlier in the season ranked Spa as the single lowest probability venue for a Hamilton win all year, scoring just 1.8 out of 10. What happens on Sunday will not be determined by any of this reporting. It will be determined by whether the trade Ferrari has chosen to make actually pays off in real conditions, on a weekend where nothing about the plan has been officially confirmed by the team itself. The flap removal, the Macarena EVO Wing, the projected 11 km per hour of extra speed. Every detail remains, at this stage, a reported plan rather than a settled fact, and Belgian weather alone has been known to scramble far simpler strategies than this one. What is confirmed is the shape of the bet. Ferrari has taken the one advantage that made its car special all season and set it aside, on the one weekend built to punish exactly the weakness that advantage was quietly hiding underneath.